Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the Sharon Moore suspension. He will be suspended for games 3 and 4 of this upcoming season. Will he be suspended for games 1 and 2? Probably up to Charlie Baker in the NCAA, and we'll see where they end up landing on that. But moving on forward here, spring practice has officially come to an end all around the country. Washington's always kind of the last straggler out there. They had their spring game this past weekend, so we are officially into the summer months and what I like to call the championship months. The months where you really figure out who's going to win a championship, who's not, because it falls on the players going forward. Over the next, couple of weeks, over the next month or so, it falls fully on the players and the leaders of those teams to get everyone together, to do those couple extra workouts, to get all the wide receivers together to make sure the timing between the wide receiver and the quarterback is fully on mark. All of that stuff happens right about now, and I think that's where you win championships. But let's go ahead and jump into this, and let's talk about one of the bigger storylines of the spring is we still got a lot of unknowns, and I think it's because we didn't get to see as many spring games as we usually do around this time of year. You didn't have Texas playing a spring game, you didn't have USC, I believe, playing a spring game, and then a couple of teams just didn't have them on TV. You just had to go to the stadium if you wanted to watch. Now, we got plenty of intel. It's not to say that we have no intel coming out of spring and we're all just going in blind going into the next season, but I think when you come out of spring, I feel like everyone has, I don't want to say set opinions, but feel pretty good about certain teams and feel not so good about other teams. Right now, I feel pretty good about a lot of teams and not great about any of them. I'm very, very kind of a lot of unknowns out there for so many different teams. I think when you talk about Texas, how good was Arch Manning throughout this practice? It sounds like it has been incredible. Is it really been incredible, or is it just we haven't seen it? So a lot of different things that are still kind of going around, a lot of unknowns, and less spring games kind of gives you that. So that'll be a really interesting thing to watch. I would love to see more spring games kind of get piled back into the mix starting next year. I think there's a right way to do it. I think getting rid of the spring portal might be the best way to do it, just so teams don't have to worry about that poaching aspect that was brought up a number of times when teams were canceling those spring games. So there's a lot of different things at play here, but I think when you look at those post-spring top 10s, then I'll do mine here in a second, I think you'll find a lot of teams up there at number 1. Some say it's going to be Texas, some say Penn State, a couple still have Ohio State up there. I've seen a couple with Clemson there. So there's a lot of different teams that are coming out of spring, and usually you'd be able to pinpoint a team and say, that's the best team in the country. That's the team that's going to at least be the on-odds favorite to win the national title. I don't think you have that this year. I think we had Ohio State last year that ended up being the team that won it. I don't think you have that, and maybe we do have it. It's just not being known right now because we just haven't seen these teams play all that much. So part of me loves this. The intrigue of it all is very, very interesting. Part of me wants to get a little bit more intel, be able to watch spring football, and I think we all kind of agree that around this time in spring football has felt a little bit more special in past years, and this year just leaving a little bit to be desired. So we'll see what happens. Maybe Dion in Colorado and Fran Brown in Syracuse can get together next year and add a little bit of spice to spring, but at the end of the day, still a lot of unknowns, and I think those spring games going away have a lot to do with that. And then we got a ton of transfer quarterbacks, and this doesn't even scratch the surface of guys that are going to a new school and getting ready to play. But these 3 guys I've heard a lot about throughout spring practice, and we'll start with Carson Beck. Carson Beck has officially been cleared to throw the football over there at Miami. Came kind of at the wrong time, right? You finished spring practice, now you're starting quarterback from throw the football. It falls on him now. He's got to be the leader of that team. He's got to be able to get all those guys out to a field and get them ready to roll. He's got to be able to get JoJo Trader out there, and they just added the wide receiver that I'm now blanking on. Keelan Marion is who I was thinking of. An incredible player that he's going to have to get out onto a random IM field and get him to throw passes so they can get that timing, get everything down right, because he hadn't been able to throw the last couple of months throughout spring practice. Definitely will be a really interesting thing to watch, and could come down to that in that first week game against Notre Dame. How ready is he? How close are him and those wide receivers? And is he even fully healthy at that point will be something to watch. As of right now, he can throw, and now it's about just taking those steps forward. Then you got John Mateer in the middle right there, and he has probably been the darling of spring practice if I had to pick one. There's always that one player that really does, fly off the shelf, that has everyone talking, and I think last year was Jeremiah Smith for some very interesting, for some different reasons, but John Mateer has come into an Oklahoma team that needs something. They need a reason to believe. They need a reason to say that we can find a way to get to maybe 9 wins, get to maybe even 8 wins, and be in a conversation for the SEC. I think when you have John Mateer, you always have a shot. He's one of my top 5 quarterbacks in the entire country. They added Jaden Ott right next to him, the running back from Cal, incredible player that as long as you keep him healthy will make special plays for you. Sounds like the O-line is playing a little bit better, so Oklahoma's starting to believe again, and I think number 10 has a lot to do with that. A remarkable quarterback and a guy that gives you a chance in just about every single game you're going to play this year. Now, we obviously still know the running game is not going to be elite. The offensive line still has some issues, so it's going to be interesting for Oklahoma nonetheless. But John Mateer has been everything Oklahoma fans could possibly have wanted throughout the spring practice. Now it's time to really kick it into high gear and get ready for the season. And then Fernando Mendoza shining at Indiana as well, a guy that came into Indiana after Curtis Rourke walked out. He's a more talented player than Curtis Rourke. Can't promise that he's going to play better because experience is a big part of this, only going into his second year starting, his first year in that system. It'll be really interesting to watch what he can do and how he kind of develops over the next little bit. But very, very talented, obviously did a great job throughout spring and it's catching the eyes of a lot of NFL draft scouts going into this year. So a very, very talented kid, absolutely a guy that can get Indiana going. And they follow up last year with another year where they're at the very least in the CFP conversation. Curt Cignetti's probably not going anywhere around Bloomington for quite some time. So an incredible player in all 3 of these guys. Hugely important. All 3 of these teams could find a way to make a run to the CFP. All 3 could fall on their face in really bad ways, and it's going to come down to those 3 guys right there. Then we got QB battles all over the country, and this one seems to have been relatively decided. Over in Notre Dame, Steve Angeli has walked out the door. He has made his way over to Syracuse, which is a great fit for him. Cannot wait to see what he can do over there. I think Fran Brown showed everyone last year that he gets the right guy in that room to be his quarterback. They can do some special things. So I think Steve Angeli had a great spot there, but it sounds like the guy that kicked him out the door, proverbially kicked him out the door, is CJ Carr. Very talented young quarterback, a guy that's going into his redshirt freshman year, and he can sling the ball all over the yard. He is definitely the most talented thrower of the ball on this team. Even when Steve Angeli was there, he was very much the most talented thrower out there. I think Kevin Minchie still will have a little bit to say in this conversation. I could see a lot of packages for him kind of in that run game because that would add a whole new dynamic to this offense, but it sounds like it's CJ Carr's job. It sounded like this was a battle for quite some time, but CJ Carr has wowed them enough. Really like this quarterback. Don't know if it's going to be quite as good as what they had with Riley Leonard last year, but I know that run game is going to be really good. I know that defense is going to be downright nasty. I think CJ Carr will be more than fine as long as all of that other stuff works out the way that I think everyone expects it to. Then you got Ohio State, another QB battle that Ryan Day just refuses to tip his hand, but I would be shocked if it was not Julian Sayin. Now, Lincoln Kienholz is holding in there, and I think that's probably the more important part of this, is Lincoln Kienholz seems to be firmly in the number 2 spot, or at least firmly fighting for that number 1 spot, if not in that number 2 spot, and Tavian St. Clair is not. And I think that's the bigger thing here, where not to say that Tavian St. Clair wouldn't have been a great backup for this team, but to say you'd like the guy with a little bit more experience to be the one that jumps in and has to run an offense. Lincoln Kienholz has the most experience among these quarterbacks going for this job right now. I do think it'll be Julian Sayin. I think he fits that little bit more of that CJ Stroud mold that Ryan Day loves so much, and with Ryan Day calling the plays this year, makes a lot of sense that it's going to be him at quarterback. I tend to believe that's going to be him. Lincoln Kienholz is pushing very hard. I think it's more encouraging that Lincoln Kienholz is even making this a fight. Whether or not it's all that close, I don't know, but Kienholz being a very confident quarterback going into next year will be important for Ohio State in case this Julian Sayin thing just doesn't work out as perfectly as they would like. Moving on to Tuscaloosa, Alabama, it's Ty Simpson's job to lose as of right now. When I picked these earlier in the spring, I leaned Austin Mack. I felt like he knew the offense. I felt like with Ryan Grubbs coming in, he was going to enjoy having Austin Mack there, and it was going to lean that direction. Ty Simpson's continued to take control of this job. So it does feel like it is going to be his job. DeBoer is not going to pick a quarterback until rather late in this process, if I had to imagine, but the times that he's picked a quarterback, it's done pretty well for him. Last year was an interesting situation with Jalen Milroe where he was not taking him out of out of just about any game, and he probably shouldn't have. But at the end of the day, I think this is going to be his full quarterback decision, and sounds like it's going to be Ty Simpson. Very talented kid that absolutely could play really good football. I think Keelan Russell is pushing for that backup spot, so definitely a guy to watch down the road. But it sounds like it's Ty Simpson's job to lose. I wouldn't be surprised if they announce this one pretty early on in fall camp. And then Colorado, the one that is very, very interesting to me because both quarterbacks looked pretty good during their spring game. Julian Lewis showed a lot of ability throughout that spring game. I'd still lean Caden Salter in this one. I think it's going to be a little bit closer than I once thought. I heard some people think that Julian Lewis was going to redshirt. I don't think that was ever the plan for Colorado. I think ideally, maybe that's the way that this would go down with Caden Salter playing really good football, but I don't know. Julian Lewis, is playing really, really good football for the Buffs right about now. I'd still lean Caden Salter because of the experience, because of the mobility, but definitely a very, very interesting one to watch, and Deion's not letting anyone know before that Week 1 game against Georgia Tech. I can almost promise you that. And then we got some of the bigger portal moves in the spring portal cycle, and there were a lot more than this. I promise you that. But as I see it, Nico Iamaleava, Joey Aguilar, that kind of trade that happened between UCLA and Tennessee took the cake for a lot of this, obviously. But then Trevor Pena, very talented wide receiver from Syracuse that apparently was asking for a pretty penny from Syracuse, has found his way down to Penn State, a guy that Penn State needs very badly. We'll talk about them in the next segment, as you can imagine, and that is a huge, huge addition to an offense that really feels like they have a wide receiver core that could be special this year for the first time in maybe my lifetime, if I'm being totally honest. Then you do have Jaden Ott joining Oklahoma. Talked about that a little bit earlier with John Mateer. If this guy is healthy, he's one of the best running backs in the country. He can catch the ball out of the backfield incredibly well, has elite breakaway speed, has very, very solid contact balance. He's a very good running back. He's absolutely someone that, as long as him and John Mateer are on the field at the same time, that's one of the best backfields you're going to find around the country. Keelan Marion, another guy we talked about a little bit earlier with Carson Beck, and definitely a guy that can have a huge impact for Miami. One of those guys that maybe you didn't notice too much for BYU throughout the season. He can make plays in the kick return game and the punt return game, can make plays down the field, is very, very shifty. One of those guys that I just feel like if he's in a more central role for an offense, he could be one of the big-time players in the entire country. So definitely a guy to watch there. Murad Watson, a defensive lineman from Syracuse as well, much like Trevor Pena, finding his way over to Texas. Texas has loaded up on the defensive line, has added, I believe, 5 different guys to kind of backfill those positions left by Alfred Collins and Vernon Broughton that just had their names called this past weekend. So remarkable player, absolutely a guy that will make immediate impacts for the Longhorns, and he was a freshman All-American last year, so that doesn't hurt by any means either. Very talented kid and absolutely will have a huge impact for the Horns. Elo Medozi is another guy to watch. Came over from Army and edge rusher going down to Athens, Georgia. This guy's a freak, an athletic beast, and someone that with a couple of months with Kirby Smart, with a couple of months with Glenn Schumann and all the guys down there, he could do some really special things this year. I think he's a huge addition to a group that is not all that stacked when it comes to edge rushing. I love Gabe Harris, another name to watch down there in Athens, but Elo Medozi is a guy they very badly needed, and I think they got an absolute gem, frankly. We talked about Steve Angeli finding his way over to Syracuse. Have to assume he's going to be the starter. Ricky Collins still kind of looking to see if he can edge out a spot for himself. I think it's going to be Steve Angeli. I think that experience really does help out. Sounds like a Kyle McCord type situation for this year for Syracuse once again. Gio Lopez going down to North Carolina. This was the thing that kind of kept Nico Iamaleava from finding his way to Chapel Hill was Gio Lopez decided to go for a little bit less money than Nico was looking for. But Gio Lopez, very talented kid from South Alabama, absolutely someone that elevates what North Carolina can do. And if you look at that North Carolina schedule, it's very, very manageable. You have an electric quarterback like this, you could do some really special things. But obviously, we'll talk about North Carolina plenty on the football field. We will not talk about off the football field very much. But at the end of the day, great pickup for UNC. Definitely will be their starter and will be a really good player for them long term. And then Bo Atkinson, another edge rusher that Georgia was looking at before they got Elo Mendoza. Very talented guy from North Carolina, finding his way up to Ohio State, losing Jack Sawyer, losing JTT. They needed some guys, and there's a very athletic, very rangy guy on the outside that is going to make a lot of plays for the Buckeyes this upcoming year. So a remarkable group of guys in the spring portal class. Obviously, was a little bit messy at times with Nico, with Joey Aguilar, with all of the craziness there. It got a little bit crazy, and I don't think any of us want it to get that crazy again, but always appreciate a couple of really interesting players moving around. I love the Keelan Marion pickup from Miami. In fact, I love a lot of the pickups that Miami has done the last couple of weeks. They've done a great job kind of filling out that roster the way that they want to. And overall, spring practice has come to an end. As I said in the beginning of it, this is when championships are won. This is when everyone gets together in some IM field at the very end of the campus, and you find a way to get a couple more reps in. And that's when the championship teams are born. So we'll find out what happens. Once we get to fall camp, we'll get a better idea of who was really out there and who really wasn't. But let's take our final break here. When we come back, let's talk about my post-spring top 10. We'll be coming out with a top 25 here pretty soon, probably towards the weekend. But as of right now, only felt confident with my top 10. Feel pretty good about it, and we'll break it down right after this, so stick with us.